Rain slammed against the glass like a punishment that would never end. The Atlantic crashed against the cliffs of Long Island, waves throwing white spray up toward the hulking glass and stone villa that sat on the edge of the world. Heat and wealth lived upstairs. In the basement, there was only concrete, metal, and the taste of rust in the air. Ciara Nolan stood barefoot on the cold floor, breath fogging faintly in the dark. A cracked practice mirror reflected a ghost in a torn leotard, dark hair twisted into a bun that had come half undone. Her toes, once her pride, were raw and swollen. She could still hear music in her head, but down here there was no sound except the storm and the soft rattling of chains. The heavy door at the top of the stairs flew open. Light exploded down the narrow staircase. Cus Walker descended 2 steps at a time, rain dripping from his hair onto the open collar of his shirt. He smelled like expensive whiskey and the city, and his anger filled the room before his body did. He held a glossy photograph in his hand like a weapon. He did not speak until he was right in front of her. Then he slapped the picture against her chest so hard it stung. "Explain this," he said. Ciara's fingers closed around the photo out of reflex. Her wrists hurt. Old bruises, new bruises, overlapping like fingerprints. She looked down. Lydia Ross stared up at her from the picture. Lydia in a pale pink ballet dress, hair in a perfect chignon, arms lifted in a flawless 5th position. Lydia's smile was bright enough to burn. Behind her was the polished floor of Ciara's rehearsal studio. There was a blur of motion at the edge of the frame, the hint of another figure falling. Her stomach clenched. "There is nothing to explain," Ciara said quietly. She came to watch rehearsal. She slipped. She fell. Cus laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound that used to be rare, and now came far too easily. "She says you pushed her," he snapped. "She says you grabbed her arm and sent her into the floor, because you were jealous, because you could not stand her watching you dance." He grabbed Ciara's wrist, fingers digging into purple and yellow marks he had put there 2 nights ago, when she refused to come upstairs on command. "Do you know what the doctor said?" he asked, voice dropping. "He said she might never dance again." Ciara felt something crack in her chest. It was not new. It was just one more fracture in a heart that already looked like a spiderweb. "The doctor also said there was no fracture," she replied, forcing her voice to stay even. "Just a sprain." She screamed for the cameras. "Cus, you saw that." "She looked at me and smiled when you turned away." His eyes flashed. "You are calling her a liar?" he said. "Lydia has never lied to me." Ciara lifted her chin and finally met his gaze. Once, those eyes had been her refuge. Now they were the bars of the cage. "She lies every time she calls me her friend," Ciara said. "She lies every time she stands in your doorway, with tears in her eyes, and tells you she wants us both to be happy." Cus' jaw clenched hard enough that a muscle jumped. "I married you," he said slowly, "because I thought I could move on. I thought I could love you for who you are, but every time I look at you, all I see is her." His thumb brushed over her cheekbone. It could have been a caress. It felt like he was measuring where to hit. "I love this face," he murmured, voice turning cruel. "I am not sure I feel anything at all for the rest of you." Ciara swallowed. "That is not my fault," she said. "That is a wound you refuse to heal." Cus' temper snapped. He shoved her back. Her shoulder hit the mirror, a hairline crack running just a little farther. Shards trembled but did not fall. "Enough," he snarled. "Enough of your stories, Ciara. Enough of your jealousy, your paranoia, your little performances." He turned away, pacing once across the cramped room, then whipped back toward her, eyes rimmed red. "You pushed Lydia," he said. "Because in your head I am still the boy I used to be with her, and you cannot stand it. So you tried to take her out of the picture, literally." "That is not what happened," she said. He did not hear her, or he refused to. He moved to the corner, where her old ballet bag sat slumped on the floor. Her mother's last gift to her lay on top, a pair of soft pink point shoes, the satin worn, but carefully cleaned, after every performance. He picked one up and turned it in the light, thumbs rubbing the place where her toes had bled through dozens of times. "Kiss," she whispered. "Please do not." He smiled with no warmth at all. "You say dance is your freedom," he said. "You say it is the only place you feel like yourself. Maybe that is the problem. Maybe you need fewer illusions and more reality." He snapped the shoe in two with a savage twist. The sound was small, a dry crack, but it hit Ciara like a gunshot. Her knees folded. She caught herself on the wall, breath coming in short, shocked bursts. He broke the other shoe more slowly. It was almost careful, the way his fingers worked through the satin and the hard, molded toe, like he was dismantling a bomb. These go in the trash. He said. You are not stepping on a stage until you remember what you did. He dropped the ruined shoes on the floor at her bare feet. Then he reached up and flicked the single light switch. The room plunged into darkness except for the thin rectangle of the high window, where a flash of lightning turned the sea outside into a sheet of white. When you are ready to apologize to Lydia, he said from the doorway, voice echoing off concrete. You can come upstairs. Until then, this is where you stay. The door slammed. The lock turned with a flat, final click. Sierra stood in the dark, heartbeat pounding in her ears. Thunder rolled overhead like distant applause. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the thin mattress in the corner. With shaking hands, she lifted the pillow and reached underneath. Her fingers brushed paper and plastic. The little collection of stolen, sleeping pills rattled softly. She had taken them one at a time over weeks when the housekeeper forgot to lock the bathroom cabinet. Enough to make her dizzy. Enough to make cold water feel like a blanket. Beside the pills was an envelope, the paper already soft from too much handling. Dear Kiss, she had written in a cramped hand. She had started the letter a dozen times. Every version sounded wrong. She had written apologies, accusations, explanations. Tonight she had finally settled on something else. A simple, clear goodbye. You will not believe me, she whispered to the empty room. You never did. Rain battered the tiny window. Sierra pushed herself to her feet, joints aching. She crossed to the wall and stood on the narrow metal bed frame, fingers reaching toward the latch. Eve Carter had smuggled her a small pair of pliers last week, hidden in the seam of a blanket. For emergencies, Eve had whispered when the guard turned his head. Or for miracles. I will be on the cliff when the storm comes. You know the rest. Sierra had not known if she would be brave enough. Tonight, bravery was not the word. This felt like something else, something rawer, a refusal to die slowly. She dug the pliers into the rusted latch and twisted. Metal shrieked. The window groaned open 2 inches, then 3, icy wind knifing into the room. Water sprayed her face, salt stinging the split in her lip. She swallowed 3 pills without water, then 3 more. They scraped down her throat, chalky and bitter. Her heart was a drum. Her hands stopped shaking. She tucked the letter under the pillow, weighed it down with the broken point shoes, and climbed up onto the sill. Outside, the night was a black mouthful of teeth. Waves smashed against the rocks below, white foam ghosting up in bursts. The air smelled like rain, gasoline from the little motorboat Eve had dragged under the cliff earlier, and the metallic tang of fear. Sierra pulled herself through the opening until she was balanced on the narrow exterior ledge. Her toes curled over slick stone. Wind pushed at her, grabbing handfuls of her damp shirt. She thought of her mother, of long drives to tiny additions, of motel rooms with thin walls and wide dreams. She thought of the first time Kiss had clapped for her, his eyes shining like she was the only thing on stage that mattered. She thought of Lydia's whisper in the studio 3 days ago, warm breath against Sierra's ear as she smiled for the cameras. He will never choose you over me. Lydia had murmured. You are just a pretty echo of his past. A convenient shadow. That is all you have ever been. Another wave slammed into the cliff. Sierra's eyes burned, but no tears fell. I am done being a shadow, she said into the wind. She stepped off the ledge. For a heartbeat, there was nothing under her but air. Then the sea hit her like concrete, cold and unforgiving. The impact tore the breath from her lungs. Darkness rushed in. Far above, on the cliff, a small boat burst into flames. Eve stood with the flare gun still raised, the red fire reflecting in her wide eyes. The motorboat Sierra had soaked in fuel earlier went up fast, light licking at the rain. From the villa, it would look like chaos, fire, storm, a girl who had finally broken. Eve clutched her own envelope, the one full of forged hospital reports and false timelines that would say Sierra was beyond saving, and whispered Sierra's name. Swim. She begged the dark waves. Please, Sierra, swim. The storm swallowed her voice. The boat burned. The girl in the water sank, pills dragging her down toward the deep. By morning, the Atlantic would give back only wreckage. The caged bird had jumped. Whether she would ever fly again was a different question. 3 years later, the sea was a memory that lived at the back of Kiss Walker's throat. Sometimes he tasted salt in his coffee. Sometimes he heard thunder inside quiet conference rooms. Sometimes he woke in the middle of the night convinced he could hear knuckles pounding on iron, begging to be let out. On his bedroom dresser, in the city penthouse, stood a single photo of Sierra, in costume, mid-leap, frozen against a wash of stage light. Next to it sat a silver frame holding a letter with smudged ink. Dear Kiss. He read the letter on the nights when he wanted to punish himself. He read the letter on the nights when he wanted to pretend he had been the victim. He read it so often that the folded lines had softened, the paper almost translucent. You loved a ghost of your past and hung it on my face. I tried to live inside that shadow until I disappeared. I am tired, kiss. I am so tired. The rest of the words were worse. He had not been there when they pulled charred wood from the waves below the villa. He had been driving back from the city with a new bottle of whiskey when the butler called, voice shaking. By the time he reached the cliff, the Coast Guard's lights strobed across the water. A little motorboat burned as it sank. Rain smeared everything into a smear of gray and red. They found Sierra's letter in the basement. They found her broken point shoes, the satin blackened at the tips. They did not find a body. The report called it a probable drowning. The press called it tragic. Lydia called it her fault on television, voice quivering as she insisted she had never meant for her visit to hurt Sierra. Her father called Kuss an unstable risk, and used the chaos to push for a merger that would swallow Walker Media whole. Grief sat on Kuss's chest like an animal. He shut down the merger with a ruthlessness that surprised even him. He cut ties with the Ross family. He closed the villa and locked the basement door. He stood on the cliff on stormy nights and stared at the waves until dawn. He also hired people. First a private investigator, then an entire firm. Then he bought the firm and turned it into a division of Walker Holdings. If she is alive, he told the director, I want to find her. If she is not, I want proof. No more probabilities. The director, a woman in her 50s with eyes like flint, looked at him for a long time. The ocean does not always give back what it takes, she said. You know that. I know what the report says. Kuss replied. I also know Sierra. She did not write that letter so I could sleep at night. She wrote it to make sure I could never sleep again without seeing her hands on that window frame. He saw Lydia less and less. At first she had been constant, a soft shadow in the corner of every room, offering coffee and concern. She moved through his penthouse with the ease of someone who knew exactly where he kept the spare key. She talked about grief and healing and forgiveness. I know what it is like to lose someone, Kuss. She murmured one evening, sitting too close on the leather couch. We have both suffered. Maybe we can help each other through this. He stared at the letter in the frame, at his own reflection in the glass, at the faint, distorted ghost of Sierra's angry eyes. I do not want your help, he said. He saw the moment the soft mask slipped. For a heartbeat, Lydia's pretty face hardened, envy and something darker flashing in her eyes. Then it was gone. As you wish, she whispered. I just do not want you to lose yourself too. He had already lost himself. He had just finally noticed. 3 years taught him new habits. He went to the office earlier, stayed later. He stopped letting anyone else make key decisions. He listened more closely when people who were not rich, white, and male told him things that hurt his pride. He fired anyone who tried to spin truth into something more palatable. He went to therapy for exactly 6 sessions before walking out, because the therapist kept asking if he had considered writing a letter to Sierra and burning it as closure. She already wrote the only letter that matters, Kuss said tightly. What I need is not closure. What I need is to stop being the man who made her write it in the first place. He did not drink as much, or when he did it alone, without Lydia's company. He stopped touching anyone whose consent was not loud and clear. He also, secretly, watched dance videos. Not just of Sierra, though he had every performance she had ever done saved in a private folder, but of companies all over the world. He watched bodies move across stages in Seoul, in London, in Sao Paulo. He watched feet hit wood and arms slice air. It hurt. He kept doing it. One evening, nearly 3 years to the day after the storm, his content team dragged him into a meeting about a new streaming vertical. Niche performance content is blowing up, a junior producer explained nervously. Especially intimate stuff, black box theaters, underground festivals. They played clips on the big screen. He barely listened until the last video. This one is from a small company in San Francisco, the producer said. Deep Line Movement. They submitted a proposal for a documentary series. Their choreographer goes by the name Aaron Cole. The lights dimmed. The screen filled with a dim little stage, nothing like the bright houses Sierra had danced in. There were mismatched chairs, exposed brick, a single overhead lamp. The dancers moved like they were shaking nightmares out of their bones. In the center, a woman stood still while everyone else writhed around her. She wore a plain black shirt and loose pants, hair cut to her shoulders, no makeup. No costume, no mask. When the music dropped to a low hum, she exploded into motion. Kuss could not breathe. Her lines were different, sharper, less classical. She fell to her knees more than once, fingers clawing at the floor, as if trying to rip something up by the roots. Her face was older, harder, but the way her right wrist curved on a reach. The way she rolled through her feet instead of landing hard. The way she used stillness like a weapon. "Sierra," he whispered. No one else heard him. The piece ended with the woman standing alone in a shaft of light, chest heaving, looking straight into the camera. The title card popped up, Deep Water, choreography by Aaron Cole. The proposal text scrolled briefly at the bottom. A dance about a woman who fakes her own death to escape an abusive partner, and must decide what kind of life she deserves afterward. Kuss' pulse roared in his ears. "Send me the full proposal," he said. "Now, and everything you can find on this Aaron Cole. Background, training, tax records, I do not care." The junior producer blinked. "Sir, the team recommended a different company for the first season," he began. "They have more followers, and Aaron's group is." "Send it," Kuss repeated. There was something wild in his eyes that no one in that room had ever seen. Half an hour later, he was alone in his office with the proposal pulled up on his screen. Aaron Cole, legal name, used for the past 2.5 years. No record before that. No social media under that name until she appeared in a grant database. No listed family. Age 28. He did the math. It matched. He stared at the grainy headshot attached to the form. It was not flattering. The lighting was bad, the resolution low. Her expression was neutral. He saw the scar along her jawline, a thin white line he had never seen on Sierra's face before. He saw the same stubborn set to her mouth. The phone on his desk lit up with a call from Lydia. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. He booked a flight to San Francisco. The Atlantic had kept its secrets. The Pacific was about to give one back. The Warehouse Theater in San Francisco smelled like sawdust, sweat, and too much coffee. Sierra stood at the edge of the stage, arms folded, watching her dancers run the opening sequence of Deep Water, for the third time that night. The cheap speakers crackled a little. One of the overhead lights flickered in a way that would drive her crazy if she let it. "Jordan, you are dropping your focus before the fall," she called. "Hold the audience a second longer. Make them think you might catch yourself." Jordan groaned but adjusted, repeating the movement, with his eyes locked on an imaginary point in front of him, until the moment his body hit the floor. "Better," Sierra said. Her voice sounded different to her now, less soft, less apologetic. 3 years of running a company on scraps and stubbornness had scraped the sugar off it. Eve Carter leaned against the back wall, tapping notes into her tablet. "You know what I love?" Eve said. "That you are still a menace in rehearsal even when you do not step on stage." "I step on stage when I have to," Sierra replied. "When you cannot bully someone else into taking the solo." Eve shot back. They grinned at each other, the kind of easy banter that came from surviving the same fire. Only 2 people in this room knew that Sierra Nolan had legally died 3 years ago. Only 2 people knew that Aaron Cole existed, because an overworked clerk at a Nevada courthouse had not looked too closely at the paperwork. Eve slid across the counter. "Sponsor's rep is in tonight," Eve reminded her, lowering her voice as the dancers reset. "And someone from Walker Media. Try not to scare them off by yelling too much." Sierra's stomach tightened. "Walker Media sends emails," she said lightly. "They do not send people. Some junior staffer will show up, take a few photos, and call it a day." "Maybe," Eve said. "Or maybe a billionaire with a savior complex will decide he wants to play patron of the arts." Her gaze sharpened. "If it is him," she added, "we can get you out the back. Say you are sick. I will set off the fire alarm. I still have the number of that guy with the smoke machine and the broken moral compass." Sierra shook her head. "I did not jump into the ocean so I could spend the rest of my life running," she said. "If Kuss Walker is stupid enough to get on a plane and walk into my theater, he can stand there and listen." "You sure?" Eve asked. "No," Sierra admitted. "But I am done letting fear make all my choices." Eve studied her face for a moment, then nodded once. "Okay, boss," she said. "Places, everyone?" The house lights dimmed. The mismatched chairs creaked as the small crowd settled in. It was a mix of local critics, broke art students, and a few donors in nice coats trying to look like they belonged. In the back row, a man in a dark suit slipped into a seat just as the music started. Kuss sat rigid, hands clenched on his knees, trying to breathe. The first image hit him like a memory he had not known he still had. A body curled on the floor under a narrow beam of light. The slow unfurl, the tremor in the hands, the way ribs lifted with each breath. When Sierra stepped into the light, time folded. Her hair was shorter now, brushing the line of her jaw. There was a thin scar near her ear, a pale thread. She wore no makeup. Lines he did not remember etched the corners of her mouth. She was alive. His vision blurred. She moved, and the rest of the world fell away. Every gesture in the piece spoke of drowning and resurfacing, of hands pushing her down, and her own hands shoving back. When she mimed pounding on a door that would not open, 'cause lungs burned. When she stood on an imaginary ledge, and looked into invisible water, his fingers dug so hard into his own palm that his nails drew blood. The final image was simple. Sierra stood alone, feet planted, chest rising. She looked straight into the audience, gaze sweeping the rows like a searchlight. It snagged, just for a moment, on the last row. Her eyes met his. The applause crashed over them like surf. People stood, whistled, shouted. Someone near Kiss wiped at their face. The woman next to him turned to her friend and whispered, "That wrecked me." Sierra did not look away at once. Shock flashed across her features. Then her expression turned to ice. She blinked, severing whatever thread had stretched between them, and bowed with the others. When she disappeared into the wings, Kiss exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. He stayed in his seat through the second piece and the third, though he could not have described a single step if someone had paid him. His entire body thrummed with the knowledge that Sierra was 20 yards away, breathing the same air, blood still moving under the skin he had once bruised. When the show ended, Eve appeared at the end of his row, expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Walker?" she asked. "I am Eve Carter. We have exchanged emails. Thank you for coming." He stood. "Thank you for inviting me," he said. "Your work is a powerful." Her mouth twitched. "You have not seen mine yet," she said. "That was all Aaron." "Aaron," he repeated, the name strange in his mouth. Eve's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "She would like to speak with you," she said. "If you are up for that. Alone." Kiss' heart thudded hard enough that the sound almost drowned out the chatter in the lobby. "I am," he said. Eve slid a look at him that was part assessment, part warning, and led him through a side door, down a hallway scuffed with tape marks and shoe prints, to a small room with peeling paint, and a couch that had seen better decades. "The green room," she said dryly. "Very glamorous." Sierra stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself. The city's damp night pressed against the glass behind her, neon from a nearby bar sign grazing the edge of her face in red. She did not turn when the door opened. Eve hovered in the doorway for a second, then looked pointedly at Kiss. "I will be right outside," she said. "If anyone starts screaming, I am calling the cops or turning it into a show, depending on ticket sales." She shut the door. The room shrank. Kiss took one hesitant step forward. "Sierra," he said. Her shoulders tightened. Slowly, she turned. Up close, the differences were sharper. The scar, the weight she had lost, the new lines around her eyes that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with surviving alone. Up close, the similarities were a punch. She watched him like she might watch a wave she did not trust, ready to slam the window shut if it came too close. "Do not call me that," she said. He swallowed. "What do you want me to call you?" he asked, voice low. "Aaron," she said. "It is my name now. Sierra Nolan is legally dead," he said, unable to help himself. "Yes," she replied. "You watched her die. Congratulations. Your cage is empty." The words landed between them like broken glass. "I never stopped looking," he said. "For you." She laughed, the sound brittle. "You looked for a body," she said. "Not for a woman building a life without you." He flinched. "I thought you were gone," he said. "I thought my hands, my choices had killed you. Every storm, I stood on that cliff and waited for, I do not even know, a sign, a ghost, something. You wanted closure," she said. "I wanted a second chance." Her eyes glinted. "You got your tragedy," she went on. "I got hypothermia, 3 broken ribs, and a fake name." Images slammed through his head. Sierra fighting through black water, lungs burning, pills dragging at her muscles. Eve's silhouette on the cliff, fire on the waves. "How did you?" he began. "Do not ask me for details," she cut in. "You lost the right to know where I sleep, and how I breathe when you locked me in a room with no air and called it love." He shut his mouth. Silence stretched. He had rehearsed apologies on the plane, entire speeches. None of them survived the reality of her face. "I am sorry," he said finally. The simple words felt too small, but they were the only ones that did not taste like a performance. "For what?" she asked. "For everything," he said. For believing Lydia over you. For using your face to worship a dead girl. For snapping your shoes like it was nothing. For turning my grief into a weapon and aiming it at your ribs. Her throat moved. Do you know what it feels like? She asked quietly. To be told that the only thing someone loves about you is your face. That the rest of you is an inconvenience. Yes, he said, surprising both of them. I do now. I learned it the hard way in every boardroom where I was the kid who inherited a company he did not deserve, and had to pretend his feelings did not exist to be taken seriously. That is not the same, she said. No, he agreed. It is not. You are right. I am just saying I have begun to understand objectifying myself does not excuse objectifying you. Her eyes flicked over him, taking in the new lines on his face, the slightly looser tie, the weight in his shoulders. You look tired, she said. So do you, he replied. They stared at each other for a long, brittle moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer and somehow more dangerous. Why are you here, Kiss? She asked. Because if your answer is to bring you home, you can turn around and go back to the airport. He shook his head. Home is wherever you decide it is, he said. I am here because your work is extraordinary, because your proposal landed on my desk, because my company can help you take this piece to more people who need to see it. Sierra's brows snapped together. You came to offer me a deal? She said. After everything, do you truly think I will tie my new life to your name? Not my name, he said. Not publicly. We can structure it through a foundation, anonymous backing. You keep creative control. I stay out of your way. Why? She demanded. Guilt. Control? You miss having a ballerina in your pocket? Because I owe you, he said simply. Because I cannot change what I did, but I can choose to use the power I have now to amplify the voice I tried to silence. She stared at him like she was trying to see the trick. Then she shook her head. I do not need your money, she said. We are scraping by, but we are surviving. What I need from you is something else. His heart thudded. Name it, he said. She stepped closer, not close enough to touch, close enough that he could see the faint freckles on her nose he used to kiss when she fell asleep on the couch. I need you to admit, she said, that I did not push Lydia out loud, where it counts. I need you to say to my face, and to anyone who will listen, that you chose the wrong woman to believe. He nodded slowly. I can do that, he said. I have already started. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. I have people too, he said. And when I stopped treating my guilt like a trophy, I let them do their jobs properly. He handed her the folder. She hesitated, then took it. Inside were printed emails, security stills, bank transfers, a copy of the doctor's initial assessment of Lydia's devastating injury, and a later, unsigned version revealing it had been exaggerated at Lydia's insistence. There were messages between Lydia and her father. Make sure he sees you fall. He will blame her. Once he breaks, the merger is easy. There was a photo of Lydia entering the studio alone, no limp, no brace, just hours after she had dramatically clutched her leg in front of Cuss and the cameras. Sierra's fingers dug into the pages. She did this, she whispered. Yes, he said. She did, and I let her. I wanted so badly to believe I could fix the past that I pushed you into the shape of my trauma and called it love. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. What did you do to her? She asked after a moment. Cut her out, he replied. Of my life, of the company. I turned everything we found over to the district attorney. She is facing fraud and extortion charges. There will be no soft interviews this time. No sad eyes on talk shows. Sierra closed the folder. The room swayed a little. For 3 years, she had carried the fear that maybe she had imagined the malice in Lydia's smile, that maybe she really was unstable, that maybe the basement had been a kindness she had twisted into a prison in her mind. The papers in her hand said otherwise. It changes nothing, she said hoarsely. It changes some things, he replied. Not enough, but some. She looked up at him, eyes searching. I do not forgive you, she said. I do not expect you to, he answered. I do not love you, she added. The words scraped her throat and left a hollow ache behind. Pain flickered across his face, sharp and bright. I know, he said quietly. I killed that. I killed you and I killed your love, and somehow you still survived. That is on me. He took a breath. What I want now, he went on, is irrelevant unless it serves you. If you tell me to leave this city and never look back, I will. If you want my funding with conditions, I will sign whatever you put in front of me. If you need me to sit in a room with a stranger and talk about every ugly thing I did until my throat bleeds, I will do it. He spread his hands slightly. Your move, he said. Sierra stared at him. For the first time since he walked in, she let herself feel the weight of the choice. Not the one she had made on the cliff. The one in front of her now. She could slam the door on him. It would be clean, simple, safe. It would also leave certain ghosts unexorcised. I want therapy, she said slowly. His brows shot up. Okay, he said. I am already in. With me. She cut in. Not as a couple. Do not get ideas. I want a professional in the room the next time we pick apart what happened between us. I want to hear you tell our story in neutral air where you cannot rewrite it to make yourself feel better. He nodded once. Done, he said. I will find someone. You can approve them, or pick them yourself and send me the address. And, she added, if we take your money, it is on my terms, my company, my rules. Your name stays out of our marketing. You do not show up uninvited. You do not hover. You do not try to play patron saint of damaged dancers. He almost smiled. That last part might be a challenge, he said. But I will do my best. Her mouth twitched, just a little. If you break any of those rules, she said, I will stage a piece about castration and name the villain after you. His smile turned real, quick and painful. I deserve worse, he said. She handed the folder back, then stopped and pulled it against her chest again. No, she corrected herself. This I keep. She hugged it like armor. Fine, she said. We see what your funding can do. We see if therapy can untangle the knots. But do not mistake any of this for an invitation back into my life. I built this one without you. I intend to keep it that way. He inclined his head. Understood, he said. He moved toward the door, then paused. Sierra, he said. She glared. Erin, he corrected quickly. I am glad you did not drown. Her throat tightened. So am I, she said. He left. Eve slipped in a second later, eyes wide. You are still standing, she said. That either went better than expected or you have dissociated into another dimension. Sierra let out a shaky breath and sank onto the couch. He brought proof, she said. About Lydia. Eve's eyes darkened. Of course he did, she muttered. Rich men love receipts when it makes them feel like heroes. Sierra shook her head. He was not the hero in those papers, she said. He was the accomplice. She looked down at the folder. But he might be useful now, she added softly. If we are very careful. Eve sat beside her and bumped their shoulders together. We survived the ocean, Eve said. We can survive one stubborn billionaire. Sierra did not answer. She was too busy listening to her own heart, trying to figure out when exactly its beat had changed from rage to something more complicated. The first therapy session happened in a rented office above a laundromat, because the therapist Sierra picked had a thing about meeting trauma in ordinary spaces. Her name was Dr. Naomi Kelly. She wore jeans and boots, hair in a gray-streaked ponytail, and had the kind of calm that came from decades of listening to people say the worst things they had ever done. Kuss arrived exactly on time. He looked out of place in the narrow hallway, his tailored coat at odds with the buzzing fluorescent light and the smell of detergent. Thank you for coming, Dr. Kelly said, shaking his hand like she meant it. Thank you for agreeing to this, he replied, a little stiff. Sierra sat on the far end of the couch in the small office, arms folded. She had insisted on putting the coffee table between them like a border. This is not about reconciliation, she told the therapist. I do not want an and they lived happily ever after arc. I want clarity. I want language. I want someone to tell us when we are lying to ourselves. Ambitious, Dr. Kelly said dryly. I like it. She settled into her chair and folded her hands. First rule, she said. No shouting over each other. Second rule, no romanticizing the bad stuff. Third rule, no self-flagellation as a substitute for actual change. Sound fair? Sierra nodded. Kuss swallowed and did the same. Good, Dr. Kelly said. Then start at the beginning, not the basement. Before that, how did you meet? They traded off, telling the story like a duet that had never been rehearsed. Sierra described a crowded midtown theater, a broken strap on her shoe, a stranger in a front row seat who offered his hand to steady her as she stumbled off stage. Kuss described being dragged to a small company performance he did not care about, then being unable to look away from the girl who danced like every jump might be her last. They spoke over each other sometimes, then stopped, then let the other fill in the gaps. They skipped the sweet parts quickly at first, almost flinching away from them. The late-night diner trips. The way Sierra would fall asleep in the car on the drive back from the villa, cheek pressed to the window. The first time Cus told her about Lydia, his voice trembling, and the way Sierra had held his hand without asking him to be anything other than broken. Then they got to the basement. It took 3 sessions. By the time they finished, Sierra's throat was raw, and Cus' hands ached from clenching them. "You were abused," Dr. Kelly said to Sierra, words precise and careful. "Emotionally, verbally, physically. You already know that. I am saying it so he hears it too. You were not unstable. You were reacting to a cage." She turned to Cus. "You were also abused," she said. "By your parents. By your own unresolved grief. You let that turn you into an abuser in turn. You weaponized your power. You used guilt as fuel instead of as a warning light." He nodded slowly. "I thought if I controlled everything," he said, voice rough, "no one I loved would ever die again. So I controlled Sierra. I called it protection. It was not." "No," Dr. Kelly said. "It was not." She let that hang for a moment. "The question now," she went on, "is not whether you were a monster. You were. The question is who you choose to be next, and whether that person belongs anywhere near Sierra's life." Sierra stared at the ceiling. "I do not want him near my life," she said automatically. "Except you also invited him into this room," Dr. Kelly pointed out. "And you said yes to his funding. You do not have to justify that to me, but you do need to be honest with yourself about why." "Because he owes me," Sierra wanted to say. "Because I want him to carry some of the weight. Because part of me still wants him to see what he did. Because there is a line between us that the ocean did not erase. I want my story back," she said instead. For years, he told it. To the press, to Lydia, to himself. Even in my own head, I heard his version on repeat. I want to rewrite it while he is forced to sit there and listen. I want him to see me as more than the girl who drowned." Cus' eyes stung. "I see you," he said quietly. "I just did not like what the reflection said about me." The work was slow. Outside the therapy room, life went on. Walker Media quietly funneled money into deep line movement through a newly created foundation. Eve negotiated hard, insisting on transparency and legal firewalls. Sierra poured the funds into stipends for her dancers, proper lighting, a tour van that did not break down every other state line. They took deep water on the road. In Chicago, a teenager with a black eye approached Sierra with tears in her eyes and whispered, "I thought I was crazy. Your piece, it felt like you had been spying on my life." In Dallas, a 40-year-old man in a cheap suit stayed after the show and told Cus quietly, "I recognized myself up there, not as the dancer, as the guy in the dark. I do not know what to do with that yet. But thanks, I guess." Cus did not introduce himself. He simply nodded and said, "Do better. That is where you start." He took up space in Sierra's peripheral vision without stepping into the center. He sat in the back row at shows, silent. He carried heavy equipment when they were short on volunteers. He never crossed lines she had drawn. Sometimes, when she woke from nightmares, she saw the basement and the sea and his face all twisted together. Sometimes, when she dreamed, she saw the laundromat sign flickering outside Dr. Kelly's office and felt the strange relief of speaking out loud. She did not forgive him. But the sharpest edges of her anger sanded down into something less consuming. The documentary idea came from the Foundation's board, not from Cus. "If we tell this story right," the director, a no-nonsense woman named Mara, said, "we can start a different kind of conversation. Not just about abuse, but about what comes after. About accountability, that is more than a statement written by a PR team." Sierra hesitated. "I will not be filmed in therapy," she said. "That is mine." "Of course," Mara replied. "We are interested in your work, your dancers, the community you are building. Cus is just background noise." "That suits me fine," Sierra muttered. Cus agreed to a few on-camera interviews, reluctantly. He sat in a simple chair against a blank wall, no suit jacket, no props, no lawyer. Mara did not go easy on him. "Why should anyone trust your redemption arc?" she asked at one point, voice steady. "You had power. You used it badly. Now you are funding the same woman you hurt. How is that not just a new form of control?" "Maybe they should not trust it," he said. "Maybe it is not an arc. Maybe it is just a series of decisions. Some good, some not. I did not sign up to be an example. I signed up to be useful. If people see this and decide I am still the villain, I can live with that. I am learning I do not get to control the narrative anymore." Mara's eyes gleamed. "Do you still love her?" she asked. He thought of Sierra on stage, of the scar on her jaw, of the way she refused to let him carry her bags or her pain, of the quiet moments in therapy when she would admit to a fear, and then look furious at herself for being vulnerable near him. Yes, he said simply. Is that love about her or about you? Mara pressed. He let out a breath. I am still figuring that out, he said. The documentary, titled Deep Sea Dream, focused mostly on the dancers. Viewers saw bruised feet, shared meals, cramped van rides, whispered pep talks in tiny dressing rooms. They saw Sierra demonstrating choreography, with a precision that still made former ballet teachers mutter. Wasted feet. Under their breath. They saw teenagers in cheap sneakers learning what it meant to use their bodies without shame. They also saw Sierra stand on an empty stage, lit only by a ghost light, and say into the camera, "People ask why I keep talking to the man who locked me in a basement. Like I am betraying some code of survival. I get it. It looks messy. It is messy. But I did not come back to him. I came back to my own story. He just happens to be in the frame sometimes." The film hit a nerve. Online, comments exploded. Survivors of all genders and ages tagged each other with variations of, "This is us." Some viewers accused Sierra of glorifying her abuser. Others accused her of being too harsh on a man who was trying. She refused to read most of it. Eve read enough for both of them. "Apparently we are both saints and devils," Eve reported cheerfully one afternoon, flopping onto the studio floor after a long rehearsal. "Personally, I choose to identify as chaos." Sierra lay on her back, staring at the ceiling. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not jumped?" she asked quietly. "If I had stayed, if I had apologized, if I had become exactly the wife Lydia wanted me to be." Eve snorted. "You would be dead," she said. "Maybe not physically, but something in you would have stopped. Permanently." Sierra hummed. "And now?" she asked. "Now you are exhausting but alive," Eve said. "I will take it." Later that night, on a rare evening off, Sierra found herself walking toward the water. San Francisco's bay was not the Atlantic. The waves were smaller, the scent different. But the sound still hit a part of her nervous system that remembered cold and panic. She stood on the pier, hands on the rail, and breathed. Footsteps approached. She did not turn. "If you push me in," she said dryly, "I will haunt you." Cus huffed out a laugh beside her. "I would not dare," he said. They leaned on the railing in silence for a moment. "I watched the film again," he said. "There is a moment where you talk about still feeling like a ghost sometimes. Like you are haunting your own life. Do you still feel that way?" "Less," she said. "Some days I feel like a person. Some days I feel like a cautionary tale. Both are better than feeling like a cage ornament." He nodded. "I feel like a warning label," he admitted. "This is what happens when you let unprocessed grief drive." She glanced at him. "Maybe that is not the worst thing to be," she said. "If someone sees you and decides not to take the same road. So I am a traffic cone now," he said. "Great." She smiled despite herself. They watched the water. "When I jumped," she said quietly, "I did not know if I wanted to live. I just knew I did not want to live like that. Halfway down, I realized I wanted another chance. I just did not know if my body would cooperate." He closed his eyes briefly. "I did that to you," he said. "I pushed you to the edge and then acted shocked when you stepped off." "Yes," she said. "You did." He did not ask for absolution. She did not offer it. But when a wave splashed high enough to spray their faces, they both laughed and wiped at the water, the sound startlingly light. For a moment, they were just two people who had made it out of a storm, standing side by side at a calmer sea. A year after the documentary's release, Deep Line Movement opened their first international tour at a theater in Berlin. Backstage, the air buzzed with nerves and poorly hidden joy. Someone had hung a cheap paper banner that read "We did IT" in crooked letters. Glitter clung to everything. Sierra stood in front of a mirror that did not have a single crack in it and adjusted her simple black costume. No tulle, no tiaras. She had never gone back to classical ballet. The point shoes in her closet were a reminder, not a goal. Eve appeared behind her in the reflection, already in crew blacks, headset crooked. "House is packed," Eve said. "Half of them probably think this is a sequel to the documentary. The other half have no idea they are about to have their hearts ripped out." "Good," Sierra said. "Let us disappoint no one." Eve squeezed her shoulder. "He is here," she added softly. "Back row, on the aisle. Same as always." Sierra's heart gave a small, traitorous jump. Of course he is. She muttered. Stubborn men make good recurring characters. She took a breath, then another, and let the mirror go. On stage, the opening notes of Deep Sea Dream began. The piece had evolved since the tiny warehouse days. The choreography was cleaner, the lighting richer, the dancers stronger. But the core remained the same. A woman on a ledge, a fall, a swim, a choice. Sierra did not dance the lead every night anymore. Tonight she did. When she stepped out into the light, she felt the old panic flicker, then fade. The audience's silence wrapped around her like a curtain. She moved through the story she had carved out of pain and salt and stubbornness. When she reached the section where she pounded on an invisible door, she no longer pictured Kiss on the other side. She pictured herself, the version of her that had once believed cages were proof of love. She broke that door down with every hit. At the end, as always, she stood in stillness, breathing. Her gaze swept the rows and landed, briefly, on the back corner. Kiss sat with his hands folded, eyes bright. He did not try to catch her attention. He simply watched, bearing witness. She bowed. After the show, there were speeches in the lobby, press interviews, a blur of faces. Donors wanted photos. Young dancers wanted autographs. A girl in a red coat asked, voice trembling. Does it ever stop hurting? It stops defining you. Sierra answered. That is enough. Later, much later, when the lobby had emptied, and the last reporter had put away their microphone, Sierra stepped outside into the cold. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals. The streetlight turned each flake into a tiny star for half a second before it melted. Kuss stood a few yards away, hands in his coat pockets. You did it, he said. You took our worst night and turned it into this. We did it. She corrected automatically, then frowned. No, I did. You helped. He smiled. I am okay being the guy in the credits under special thanks, he said. Or not there at all. They stood in awkward quiet for a moment. I am not coming back to you, she said. He nodded. I know, he said. I stopped waiting for that particular miracle a while ago. So why are you still here? She asked. He looked at her, really looked, taking in the scar, the strength, the lines of laughter and fury. Because I care about what happens to the woman I once tried to own, he said. Because watching you live reminds me that I can be more than the worst thing I have done. Because leaving completely feels like erasing you again, and I will not do that. He paused. And because, he added, some loves are not meant to be romantic in the end. Some are meant to be a reminder to never, ever repeat the same harm. She considered that. You know, she said slowly. If you had shown up with speeches about soulmates and second chances, I would have slapped you. I know, he said. I flinched just thinking about it. She laughed, the sound surprising both of them. A quiet settled that was not quite comfortable, but no longer suffocating. I do not forgive you, she said again, out of habit. I know, he said again. Maybe you never will. Maybe you should not. But I forgive myself a little more each time I do something different than the man who locked you in that room would have done. That has to be enough. She nodded slowly. That is your work, she said. Not mine. He accepted that. Above them, snow thickened. A flake landed on Sierra's lashes, cold and sudden. She blinked it away. I used to think love meant drowning together, she said quietly. Now I think the best we can hope for is learning how to swim on our own, and not pull anyone under in the process. I am still learning, he said. So am I, she replied. They stood there, two former lovers, two trauma survivors, two complicated, flawed humans under a foreign sky. And for the first time, Sierra did not feel like a ghost haunting his life. She felt like the main character of her own. When she left him there and walked back inside to celebrate with her dancers, she did not glance back to see if he watched her go. She did not need to. In her hotel room that night, she slept without dreaming of the ocean. In the morning, she woke with a song in her head and a soreness in her muscles that had nothing to do with fear. She rolled out of bed, stood in front of the window, and lifted her leg into an arabesque, just because she could. Her reflection in the glass held steady. Not your caged bird, she told the empty room. Not anyone's ghost, just me. Outside, the world went on. Buses, birds, people late for work. Somewhere in that city, a man who had once been her jailer walked into a bakery and ordered coffee, then stopped to put money in a donation jar labeled Support Survivors. He did not think it was enough. He did it anyway. Deep Sea Dream lived on in theaters and videos, in whispered conversations, and loud arguments online, in the bodies of dancers who had never met Sierra, but felt her story in their bones. The girl who had jumped into the storm had come back with scars and a new name. The man who had watched her fall had learned, painfully, to sit with the knowledge that some losses are necessary. There was no neat bow at the end. No wedding, no miracle baby, no sudden, sweeping forgiveness. There was only this. Not drowning, just dancing.
Thanks for watching. Follow for more romance stories.